You're entering the Facilicast, the liberal science of buildings, with your host, Jim Zerbel.
Okay, folks, welcome back to the Facilicast, the liberal science of buildings with Jim Zerbel. I'm so pleased to have Heather Slottlke from the Sigma Group. She's a project manager there out of Milwaukee. And Heather is working primarily in the healthcare space, has a great deal of experience in there. In fact, maybe, Heather, welcome in.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. I started out working on the construction side. I worked for a painting and flooring contractor, and then I worked for a general contractor. And while I was working for a general contractor, I had a lot of opportunity to work in the healthcare space. And I was able to have enough experience that a healthcare institution actually reached out to me and offered me a job working directly for their facilities. And I started out as a project manager doing project coordination, from anything to new projects to having contractors come in for regulatory compliance testing, to helping out the mechanics with coordination of facility repairs. And from there, I was able to get promoted to facility supervisor and then to manager. And then I was reached out to by another healthcare organization who asked me to come on as a project manager in charge of infrastructure, because they wanted somebody who was a former facility manager who understood how important that was to putting together a project, and that the end result was what a facility manager and a maintenance mechanic really needed in order to take care of the building after the contractor walked away. And now I work for a consultant who helps out with engineering and design and project management and all things FM.
That's really interesting. I think the point you just brought up is the moment the contractor walks away. So with that in mind, is there anything you're learning that's new and exciting that's moving you in the healthcare FM space right now?
Well, there are several things with technology that are exciting, such as putting barcodes on equipment so the mechanic can carry an iPad, and then he can go up to the piece of equipment and scan it, and all of the information that he needs will come up on his iPad, checklists for PMs, who was the last person who worked on the piece of equipment, what materials, belt sizes, anything they need would all be at that mechanic's fingertips to be able to do the repair or the PM that is needed. Another exciting thing is GIS and putting buildings into GIS and using that also on an iPad or an iPhone. We also look at doing some 3D laser scanning that can help architects and engineers put the building into a 3D model.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that, and that's getting a lot more popular. It took some time for that to kind of get rolling, but it started with that photogrammetry, and then went to LiDAR and all that measurement stuff. Getting those into BIM or in some sort of a project model that people can actually see the actual measurements of what they're standing is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool, because when you get new equipment, especially if you have aging equipment, it is quite a different footprint. Sometimes it's a lot smaller, but sometimes it can be bigger. And just to have your engineers and your staff have that footprint in mind when you're doing planning for the future to make sure that everything fits into that space, it really helps with capital planning.
That makes a lot, and also clash detection and I can think of a thousand different things that are associated with that we see a benefit out of that. So out of that, you told us a little bit about your story about what you were doing. What's your why? Is there a particular thing or a particular event that compelled you to be in this industry and move this direction? Tell us about that.
Well, I always loved the construction side, and I think that it's very complex. And then you go into healthcare and your eyes open a little bit wider because of regulatory compliance and infection control and all of the different things that you need to work on in the space. And then you get into facilities. And I did a cath lab project while I was on the contractor side, and then I ended up going to work for that facility. And when the mechanic said, "Hey, Heather, can I show you something? Did you work on this project?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how do you think I'm supposed to get to that valve to shut it off?" And that was a very, very valuable lesson.
Interesting.
And it just made me think completely different about project management. I feel like I am very fortunate to have been on the FM side and the project management side because of that, because now I look at everything completely different. How far will the doors open? Which way is the equipment facing? And then you also think of things like, we might value engineer out these isolation valves, but what's the operational cost going to be down the line if we have to shut the whole department down or the whole floor in order to do that? So it really makes you think that those items are more important in the long term than it is if you're just looking at the drawing, building to the drawing, and then walking out the door.
Yeah, so that was a valuable lesson right there. Just the whole the whole dichotomy between quality life cycle of a project and what they call pseudo value engineering, right? That if you're just looking at a plan set and you're not involved in the FM daily side of it, you have no idea. It's just a plan set, and it manifests itself, and it gets built, and then 5 years later, there's an issue, and right, the whole floor of the hospital gets shut down because
Yeah,
well, that valve was going to be $11 extra.
exactly.
Oh, that's hilarious. So then, you told us your story about how you got involved and found your way to the Sigma group. How is healthcare FM finding its talent these days?
Well, it's not easy. And mostly we need to rely on our network and word of mouth and asking other people if they know anybody that that needs a job, that turns around, fixes things, is a problem solver, to get them in the door. If you tell your HR representative oftentimes that you're looking for a maintenance mechanic, they hear mechanic and they go to auto mechanic. Or you say, I need an operating engineer, and they immediately think, oh, you need a PE. And they don't always have that understanding. So using your network and then making sure that your recruiter and your HR professional have the right job description and understanding of what a maintenance mechanic and a facility manager do on a daily basis is very important.
Yeah, I've got to concur. I have to concur, and that dynamic is changing because finding that talent is getting harder and harder. Of course, you just participated in an event that we're involved in with gaining more talent, and we think we're going to see a whole lot more of that sort of action where we can start seeing students and young adults coming into this career intentionally, where they're not just falling into it, or they happen to be a mechanic, or they happen to be an engineer,
Right.
that can learn that game and feel all about. So then we talked about it takes all of us, right? Being tasked with all of the work that the people in the facility side, particularly in the healthcare environment, there are few people that are more highly tasked than those individuals, and yet we often look at that as an organization and consider that if we don't do it, and we think it's somebody else's responsibility to find talent, to generate talent, maybe to change the game in that talent space, that maybe we are actually the problem because we're only paying attention to our own job and our own selves. You have any commentary about that, about the takes all of us element?
I think sometimes we get stuck on you need healthcare experience, but how do we get people in the door? Which is how contractors and people like me end up getting into the facility maintenance door. I took a class once and it was all FM, and the instructor asked us how many people knew when they were going to grow up they were going to work in facilities management, and nobody raised their hand because a lot of people don't know about it. So we need to have the ability to go to the schools, to go to the tech schools, to recruit some of the younger people, and we need to do a good job at cross training, because at the end of the day, the FM has to know a little bit about everything. And those are our future facility supervisors and managers and directors. And so we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the cross training. Yes, it's great to be a system matter expert, and we should play to people's strengths, but we should make sure that they also know a little bit about everything. Also, on the facility side, sometimes you're in a building where you might be the only one there, or there might be two people there at night or on a holiday, and you need to know how to react and be decisional to everything that might happen inside that facility. So cross training and having a succession plan is very, very important in facilities.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that, and particularly given the fact that healthcare never shuts down.
Correct.
Healthcare is 24/7. Doesn't matter what time of day. There's got to be somebody that where the buck stops. And we've seen you kind of alluded to some of the things that are exciting. There are some technological changes that are occurring. And let's talk about those innovations for a moment. We see more CMMS sort of systems coming into play. Are there particular systems that are making that gap, that are helping to close some of that gap, the skills gap between people we don't have, people we'd like to have, and the person that's already there doing the work?
I think that is a great question. I think that technology and how fast it's growing, I think that touches on bringing the younger people into that fold, because they're going to just be able to pick that up and do it. We're an aged population in facilities, and we get an iPad and we're like, really? But that younger population is going to be able to come in, and not only are they going to be able to pick up that iPad and maybe have to learn from the older mechanic turning the wrench and what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, but they're going to be able to not only do it, but they're going to be able to take it to the next level.
With the people side of it, are there some innovations that have been occurring that you've been aware of in the healthcare space in terms of people innovation? Tell me us a little bit about that.
For some of the younger people who are coming in with that technology and the barcodes and being able to get rid of the binder and being able to find things faster on the computer, I think the cross training can go both ways. But I believe that really teamwork, you have to have a good leader, and you have to have that teamwork and that cross training. And there's no such thing as a silly question. And we're all going to learn from mistakes, because you never know when you're going to experience something that you never experienced before.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, despite the fact that there's all sorts of technology available, I guess we got to admit, still, it's an old adage that there ain't no replacement for experience.
Correct. You never know. You might be in a facility for years and never have to replace your generator. Or you might walk into a facility where your generator is failing, and you have to figure out not only what you're going to do to replace it, but what you're going to do in that 48 weeks before your new generator arrives to make sure that to make sure that you have emergency power. You constantly have to think on your feet and You, depending on the facility that you're in, depending on what you take care of, and depending on where your career takes you, you're going to experience different things, and you have to be able to use that experience to think on your feet and be decisional, and also take that up to the leadership, and explain it to them so that they understand what they need to do to support you.
I couldn't agree more. With that in mind, are there any common myths in the healthcare FM space that you'd like to dispel or talk about?
There are a lot of facility managers who oversee environmental services, but in healthcare, environmental services is very important because the cleanliness and the infection control and the terminal cleaning that we need in order to make sure that patient care is sterile in a sterile environment, that's usually separate. So sometimes those two definitely work together and hand in hand, but sometimes those two cross connect. And facility managers in healthcare really take care of the built environment and mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection.
Yeah, and that unto itself is so darn complex in any healthcare environment. Knowing full well that, oh, we ran out of oxygen, somebody's gonna die. There's some gravity there. You have some impact.
I just really am excited about facilities, and I know it's so tough to find not only facility managers but maintenance mechanics, and that's just something that I really feel passionate about, is finding the right mechanics and making sure that they know that there's a place for them to go.
Yeah, place for them to go, and where those hands-on skills are really celebrated and are really, really necessary. I couldn't agree with you more in that regard.
HR finds people, and like I said, we use our network. Unfortunately, we steal people all the time, and we use our network in order to do that. But we do always have the facility manager and the facility director do the interviewing and make that decision. And what I did when I was on the FM side and when I worked directly for a facility is I always did a peer review. If I really liked somebody, I would, because someone could sit in front of me and talk to me and I could think that they're fantastic. And then they start, and the maintenance mechanics who are training them are like, this guy doesn't know what a tool is, Heather, So it's nice to have that peer review where you can have the maintenance mechanics do interviews as well to say, what is your experience really with fixing things? Do you know the difference between an air conditioner and an air handling unit? And they kind of get that warm and fuzzy. Plus, maintenance men tend to try to have somebody who works that's going to fit in too, right? So they're like, this guy, he talked to us, he engaged in us. We talked about hunting and fishing, and he's got a toolbox. We're in, they're just able to feel that out and know whether or not they have the maturity to work in the healthcare space and learn it.
We in the FM space have been working really hard to address the gender differences in FM. And of course, there's a strong entity, Women in FM, that we have some association with. And what percentage of the facility management folks in the healthcare space are women at this point? Is it growing? Is it getting better, or is it static? We know that there's a problem of bringing talent in as a whole. Tell me more about that.
I mean, I think it's static. I think it's static. Some women who get into those FM positions end up getting promoted, that are really good, and they end up getting promoted and stolen by other entities. So they don't stay. So then it kind of ebbs and flows, but I don't think that I've seen it necessarily improve.
So it hasn't changed, and you're not seeing a lot of women coming into the facility management or the facility maintenance elements. Is that what you're sharing?
Yes.
Okay. There may be hope on the way from programs like the Facilitathon. We've talked about that before. You were one of those volunteers for the Wisconsin contingent.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty much a 50-50 mix. It's interesting how, individuals that come into these spaces are coming from, they might come from construction or some other related thing. And then there are a lot that just kind of get dropped into it, and you shake your head and said, how did that happen? Coming back to, what's your story, Morning Glory? So,
Right.
yeah,
I
well,
mean, it's definitely a fun position because, like I said, you get to touch so many things. You get to be in charge of some great people. You get to, facilities people are caretakers too. They take care of the building, which makes it comfortable for the great doctors and nurses and all of the caretakers to take care of the patients and their visitors and families, and it's ultimately about the patient. And so you get to work for the greater good, and you get to work with a great group of people. I have never worked with a bad group of maintenance guys or gals. um, I have always just really appreciated the depth of their knowledge and all of the things that they can do. It's just amazing.
that's really, really great. Can you share with us where we can find you and some of the organizations you're involved in?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at the Sigma Group on Canal Street in Milwaukee. You can also find me at WIA, which is the Wisconsin Healthcare Engineering Association. I am currently a chapter member of 1, 2, and 3, and very involved. It's a great organization, great network of people, everybody getting together to talk about things and lessons learned so we can all learn from each other. It's a great organization. I am also a member of the Southeastern Wisconsin chapter of IFMA, which is International Facility Management Association, and you can find me at those meetings.
That sounds good. And we'll be sure also to post your information at the tail end of our Facilicast today. Heather Slottlke, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us today. And may you have a splendid afternoon. And I hope that all of our listeners enjoyed our talk today about FM in healthcare. With that, that's the Facilicast with Jim Zerbel. I'm so pleased to be with you, the liberal science of building.